Ye Gods by Tom Holt. Chapter 7. At approximately 5:30 the next morning, the door of Mr. and Mrs. Derry's house opened and Jason Derry came out. He was carrying a long canvas sack and a plastic carrier bag. The sun rose in a confusion of pink seepage and presented the first commercial break of the day. Unfortunately, for the consortium of Antipodean tycoons who manage it now, very few mortals have the necessary satellite dishes and decoding equipment to receive the signals it broadcasts. But Australians are nothing if not patient. Just as soon as the fossil fuels run out, they argue, and everyone starts taking solar energy seriously, then we'll have 'em. By curious accident, probably connected with his unique genetic makeup, Jason Derry was a natural receiver of the sun's subliminal messages, albeit on a subconscious level only, and he often wondered why looking directly into the sun made him want to change to low-fat margarine and take out unnecessary life assurance. He had eventually managed to come to terms with the problem by telling himself not to be so bloody stupid. A small electric buggy wound up to the front gate and stopped. "Morning, George," Jason said.
"Morning, boss," the driver replied. "Where to?"
Jason grinned. "Glad you asked that, George," he replied. "Been a change of schedule."
"Oh, yes," said George cautiously. "Been rather a lot of those lately, haven't there?"
"Yeah," said Jason, undoing the top of the canvas sack. "And there's going to be a lot more. You know what this is?" George nodded.
"Sure," he said. "It's a sword of Glycerion."
"What was that last bit again?"
"Glycerion."
"Ah," Jason said after a moment. "That's what I thought the old bag said, but I reckoned I must have got it wrong. Anyway, the point is it's very sharp, George. Very sharp indeed."
"I know," George said. "So?"
Jason frowned. "Oh, come on, George. Don't be so damn thick. I'm threatening you."
"Are you?" said George, mystified. "Why?"
"Because I want to intimidate you into doing what I tell you," Jason said irritably. "That's why. Why else, for pity's sake?"
"But, boss," George said, "I always do what you tell me, don't I?"
Yes, Jason said. "But that's because I always tell you what I'm supposed to tell you. Look," he went on, "I'm not in the mood for deep metaphysical discussion, so let's just get going, shall we, before anybody notices."
George shrugged. "Whatever you say, boss. Next stop, Thessaly."
"No," Jason said. "Piccadilly Circus."
"You sure?" said George. "Look, it says here on the manifest, Larissa, ancient capital of Thessaly."
"That's what I've been trying to tell you, George," said Jason wearily. "We aren't going to Thessaly, we're going to Piccadilly Circus instead," he explained.
"Why?"
"Shut up and drive the bloody car, will you?" The little electric buggies supplied to Heroes are manufactured by Vulcan, ex-god of fire and craftsman, and being of divine manufacture, they can burn off Porsches without going into second gear. They can also come with a 20-million-year warranty and centralised locking as standard. It therefore took George less than 30 seconds to get to Piccadilly Circus, which was just as well, since it took them an hour and a bit to find a parking space.
"Will here do you?" George asked.
"Here will do fine," Jason replied. "I shouldn't be more than a couple of hours."
"Hope you know what you're doing."
"So do I." George shrugged.
"Please yourself," he said. "What's in the carrier bag?"
"Sandwiches," Jason said, "and a thermos. If anyone wants me, tell them I died of cholera. All right." Jason climbed out, tied up the canvas bag carefully, and descended the stairs to the underground station, where he stood in front of the ticket barrier and waited. After a few minutes, a very tall, thin man with a flower in his buttonhole walked up to him and coughed.
"The worship of Mithras," he said slowly, "has all but died out in Saxmundum."
"You what?"
"The worship of... bugger. Sorry," said the tall man. "Thursday's not a good day for peeling onions."
"Friday," Jason replied self-consciously, "is even worse if you happen to be left-handed. So, you're Virgil, are you?"
"Shh," said the tall man. "Keep your ruddy voice down, will you? I'm not supposed to be here."
"I know," said Jason. "Neither am I."
I told them at the office," said Virgil, ignoring him. "I was going to a seminar on wither hexameters today at Spoleto. But I bet someone's going to phone through and find out I'm not there. I'm a fool to myself to be doing this."
"You're dead,"
Jason said. "What's it to you?" "Just because you're dead," Virgil hissed darkly, "doesn't mean they aren't still out to get you. Anyway, this is definitely the last time I get mixed up in anything like this." Jason tapped his foot ever so slightly. "All right," he said. "You've made your point. Now, let's get on with it, shall we? And next time I need a guide to the underground, I'll buy one of those little maps." Virgil gave him a poisonous look and produced a couple of tickets from his raincoat pocket. They weren't like ordinary subway tickets, being luminous and made of gold. "Don't lose them," he said. "Right, abandon hope all ye and all that stuff. This way." They walked for a long time down gloomy, winding passages which echoed with unearthly noises. All around them, Jason became aware of what looked suspiciously like souls in torment, murderers, parricides, and people trying to find the westbound platforms. For all that he was a hero, he shuddered slightly. "It only goes to show," Virgil was saying, "the truth of the old saying that a friend in need is a pest. Just because I showed Dante the way through the inferno when he got lost that time. You know, one poet helping another and all that stuff. Though it's a myth if I ever heard one. You try asking a poet to help you mend a puncture in the rain and see how far you get. Just because of that, you've got it in their bloody heads. I'm a sort of one-man package holiday company. Mind you," he went on, "I blame my agent, a damp fool. He encourages them. He's got me taking a party of school children on the Dutch bulb fields next month, which really isn't my idea of a good time. I'll never forget." "Virgil," Jason said. The Mantuan turned his head. "Yes?" he asked. "What?" "Are we going the right way?" Virgil sniggered unpleasantly. "Down here," he said. "There isn't a right way. The right way is to go by bus. We go left here, I think." "But we've been walking for ages," Jason said. "True," Virgil replied, helpfully. "So which line are we taking?" "Ah, said Virgil. "That would be telling." They turned a corner and came across a busker. He had a hat with no button and a guitar with no strings, and when he opened his mouth, no sound came out. A mouth organ hovered around his head like a large chrome hornet, buzzing ominously and occasionally swooping in and biting his ear. Virgil stopped and felt in his pocket. "Oh, good," he said. "I thought I had some somewhere." He took out 2 pesetas, a corroded fenwick, and a fruit machine token and dropped them into the hat. They vanished. "A sad case," said Virgil. "In life he was a great conductor, but one Christmas he agreed to appear on one of those television comedy variety programs, and after that it was downhill all the way. First it was chat shows, then double glazing commercials, and when he died it was straight down here. Diabolical what they come up with sometimes." Jason stared. "You mean he's dead?" he asked. "Of course," Virgil replied. "You're in the underground now, you know." Around the next corner they came across a woman. She was crouched on the ground, hauled up against the tiled wall of the corridor, with her hands clenched over her ears, in which were the earphones of a Sony Walkman. Although the music was plainly audible to Virgil and Jason as they passed by, it was clear that the woman couldn't hear a note of it. "That one," Virgil commented with a shudder, "speaks for itself." For someone who didn't know the meaning of fear, Jason was beginning to feel decidedly edgy, but since Virgil seemed to be taking it all in his stride, he did his best to conceal it. Thus, when a haggard woman with staring eyes jumped out at them and demanded to know the way to Platform 7, and Virgil told her, and she darted off in the opposite direction, Jason fought back the impulse to whip out the sort of "sod it, I've forgotten again," and sweep her head off, and just stood back, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Another hopeless case," said the poet, as the woman's hysterical laughter died away in the distance. "Her crime was forever to be nagging her husband to ask someone the way whenever they got lost. Serves her right, I suppose, but still." It had been getting darker and darker the further they went, so that now they could only make out the walls of the corridor in front of them by the glow of the burning graffiti artist, conveniently nailed just above head height at regular intervals. The shadows in between contained strange, shuffling figures who made disturbing noises, which Jason did his best to ignore. "Nearly there," Virgil said. "I'd better warn you. The next bit's not for the squeamish."
"Oh, super,"
Jason murmured.
They turned yet another corner and came to a set of steps which led down to a short passageway. Onto the walls of the passageway were glued a number of screaming, struggling people on whose faces demoniac posters were drawing in moustaches. Then they came out onto a platform, and it was empty.
"Here," Jason said. "This isn't too bad."
"You wait."
Virgil chuckled grimly.
There was a clanking noise in the distance, which gradually got closer, and a tube train appeared. As it went past them, Jason could see it was filled with wan, spectral figures, all standing on one another's feet.
"Once a commuter," said Virgil. "Always a commuter. Horrible, isn't it?"
The train slowed down and stopped, and the doors opened. Some of the people inside made a dash for it and tried to get out, but at once the doors slammed shut on them with sickening force. Jason noticed with a spurt of terror that the doors had teeth.
"Can't say they weren't warned," Virgil said sadly. "Do not obstruct the doors, it says, plain as the nose on your face. Hang on, it'll stop soon."
After what seemed to Jason a very long time, the doors finished chewing the people, and a big red tongue appeared and drew them back inside. The doors closed, and when they opened again, the carriages were empty. From somewhere near the driver's compartment came an unmistakable belch.
"Right," said Virgil. "I don't know about you, but I like having my back to the engine."
Jason grabbed his sleeve. "I'm not getting in that," he said. Virgil gave him a contemptuous look and got into the carriage. Behind him, Jason sensed that there were people coming down the steps onto the platform that he really didn't want to meet, and so he closed his eyes and stepped in. The doors closed. When Jason opened his eyes, all he could see was a perfectly ordinary underground carriage, and Virgil sitting on one of the seats, meditatively stirring a large pile of ash and charred bones. Jason winced. "Let me guess," he said. "This is a no-smoking carriage."
"On the contrary," Virgil replied. "Only here the train smokes the people. Sit down and have a rest. It gets a bit hairy in a minute."
"Not again," Apollo nodded. "Honestly," Minerva said, "we're going to have to get him in one of those little collars with a little bell on it. Right then, where did you see him last?" "Piccadilly Circus," Apollo said. Minerva raised both eyebrows. "Really?" she said. Well, fancy that. No prizes for guessing where he's gone then." "Let's not be too hasty about this," Apollo said. "Maybe he just wanted to catch a train or something." Minerva ignored him. "You stay there," she said. "I'll go and see where Pluto's got to." After a long search, she eventually found the ex-god of the dead lying down in a beautifully tailored box in the cupboard under the stairs of the Dawn. She made an exasperated noise and tapped on the side of the box with her foot. "Job for you," she said. "Up you get."
"I've retired," Pluto murmured sleepily. "Go away."
"If you're not up and dressed in 5 minutes," warned Minerva, "it's a wet sponge down the back of the neck for you, my lad. We'll be in the observation saloon." When she got back to the saloon, Apollo was studying the earth through some kind of optical instrument, which he unsuccessfully tried to hide between his knees when he realised his sister was back in the room. Minerva made a familiar clicking noise with her tongue and held out her hand. Reluctantly, Apollo gave her the instrument. "How does it work?" she asked. "I'm not entirely sure," Apollo replied. "Apparently, it sort of picks up waves of random particles activated by disturbance in the fabric of possibility." Minerva frowned. She was hopeless with gadgets, but refused to admit it. "Like a smoke detector, you mean?" "Something like that, yes." "Got anything?" Apollo shook his head. "He left a trail of fused alternatives all the way down to somewhere under the Café Royal, but then the screen just went white and started bleeping at me, so I switched it off. My guess is that it means that he's already entered, well, you know." "Yes," said Minerva hurriedly. "Gods do not like to mention the place directly beneath the cellars of Hamleys by name if they can help it. Bad vibes." "Which means," Apollo went on, "he's effectively given us a slip, doesn't it?" Nonsense, Minerva said, and as she spoke, Pluto walked in. He was wearing a black dressing gown and slippers, and he was yawning. He hadn't had a haircut or trimmed his fingernails for a very, very long time.
"Well," he asked sleepily, "what's going on?"
"We need someone to go out to Regent Street for us," Minerva said. Pluto scowled.
"Oh, come on, Min," he said. "You know that place gives me the willies."
Minerva gave him a look. "Don't be such a baby," she said.
"All right," said Pluto. "You go."
"It's your kingdom."
"Was," Pluto reminded her. "I sold out to an Anglo-French consortium, remember? They were going to try and link it up with the Paris Metro. Bloody silly idea if you ask me. But—"
"Yes," Minerva interrupted. "Now, if you've quite finished, you can be getting along. We're looking for a hero, tall, muscular, blonde, the usual thing. Answers to Jason Derry. I'll put him up on the screen for you." Minerva fiddled with the controls for a moment, and a 1,000-mile-high hologram of General de Gaulle appeared in the night sky just below the Great Bear. "Oops," said Minerva. "Sorry, wrong disc. Now, try that." General de Gaulle was sucked back into the heart of the pole star and was replaced by Jason Derry, standing with one foot on the severed head of a huge reptile and looking bored. "That's him," Minerva said. Jason vanished. Pluto stood scowling at where the hologram had been for a few seconds and then tightened the cord of his dressing gown.
"Dangerous, is he?" he asked.
"Depends on what you mean by dangerous," Apollo said. "In general terms, globally speaking, yes, very probably is. On the other hand, I don't imagine he'll try and bite you."
"Sod it," said Pluto. "I think I'll take the dog."
The train stopped. Jason looked out of the window. There was nothing to see. "Where are we?" he asked. Virgil looked at him gravely.
"You should know better than to ask questions like that, son of Jupiter," he replied. "Particularly here, of all places."
"Why?" Jason asked. "We haven't broken down or anything, have we?"
"No," Virgil said, looking down at the floorboards. "Not exactly. This is where we were supposed to come to. It's what you told me you wanted to do."
Jason nodded. "So why aren't the doors opening?" he asked.
"They don't."
"How do you mean?"
"This isn't a station," Virgil told him. "If anything, it's a state of mind. This is where the train stops, but you can't get out here."
"Why not?"
"You're probably the first person in the history of creation ever to ask that," Virgil replied. "The doors don't open here for pretty much the same reason as they don't open the windows on Concorde. The environment out there is somewhat hostile."
"Is it?" Jason looked hard, but he couldn't see a trace of any sort of environment, hostile or not. There was just that sort of darkness that means all you can see is your reflection in the window. He said as much to Virgil.
"That," Virgil answered, "is the whole point. There is nothing out there. It's probably the largest accumulation of nothing in the entire cosmos."
"Oh," Jason said. "In that case," he added after a pause, "someone's been pulling my leg."
"Really?" Virgil studied his fingertips. "And who might that have been?"
Jason felt a slight twitching under his scalp. "Oh, just someone I met," he said, "and he told me that, well, something I was looking for was to be found at the underground stop directly under Hamley's, and I said that as far as I knew there wasn't one, and he said I should ask you to take me there, so I did, and now you're telling me I can't get out here."
"I said nothing of the kind," Virgil replied. "All I said was that if you're so incredibly fed up with life that you want to get out here, the doors aren't going to aid and abet you. That's all."
Jason leaned back in his seat and sighed. That seemed to be that, he told himself, and yet... "Virgil," he said, "can I ask you something?"
"Be my guest," said the Mantuan.
"If you had a little voice at the back of your head," said Jason, "that kept telling you to, no, suggesting that you do things that you really don't want to do because they're dangerous and you don't understand why they need doing
Anyway, how would you react? I would have a lobotomy, Virgil replied unhesitatingly. Nothing worse than a chatty brain, I always say. Ah, I see, said Jason. I have this awful feeling that I ought to get off the train here and go and look for, well, the thing. It. I don't want to, he added. Not one little bit, but somehow I feel like I should. You understand? Virgil nodded. Indeed, he replied sadly. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you. Lots of people get that. Ah, said Jason, encouraged. Do they? Yes, masses, Virgil replied. Just before they get killed. And a lot of people do get killed, you see, and... Will I get killed if I get out of this carriage? Jason asked. For certain. I mean, no possibility of survival. I wouldn't say that, said Virgil. What are my chances, then? I really couldn't guess, said the poet. You see, no mortal has ever been where you're proposing to go, or at least never gone and come back. Therefore, reliable data is a bit thin on the ground. Ah, the hell with that, Jason said, striving to sound cheerful. Nobody had been to America before Columbus. Virgil looked at him and leaned forward. Have you ever considered, he asked, how many people before Columbus tried to get to America, but failed because they fell off the edge of the world? But that's... You can say that, Virgil interrupted him, because you don't know what you're talking about. And, he added, I'm buggered if I'm going to waste my time telling you, because very shortly you won't exist anymore. Or at least if I tell you, then you soon won't exist anymore, because you'll leave the train. Whereas if I scare you shitless about what's out there, instead of telling you the truth, then you won't leave the train, and therefore you won't die. Clever, isn't it? I don't know, said Jason. You lost me quite early on, I'm afraid. It's a bifurcation, Virgil said. To be precise, it's an impossibility frontier. It's impossible for a mortal to know what's out there and live to tell the tale. You have to follow one of the two alternatives. Know and die, stay ignorant and live. There is no third choice. Isn't there? No. Jason grinned disconcertingly and lashed out at the window with the sword of Glycerion still in its canvas bag. The glass smashed and the train vanished. So did Virgil, the light, the sword, and, agonizingly, the sandwiches. The only thing that didn't vanish was Jason. Good dog, Pluto lied. Cerberus, the triple-headed hellhound, ignored him and growled again. The guard went white but stood his ground. Sorry, mate, he insisted, but unless it's a guard dog, you can't take it on the train. Rules is rules. Pluto shrugged. Do you contain bone marrow? He asked. The guard gave him a bewildered look. I suppose so, he said. Why do you ask? It's said on one of those commercials, Pluto replied. It's good for dogs, apparently. How about calcium? They're supposed to need a lot of calcium. Here. I know, Pluto said miserably. I don't enjoy it much either. All this threatening and menacing and so on. It's this damned dog that causes all the trouble. I'd leave him behind, but if he sees me going out and I don't take him with me, he grabs the lead in his mouth and jumps up at me and barks. I don't actually like dogs much, to tell you the truth. The guard swallowed hard and tried not to look at the 6 small, round, red eyes that were fixed on him. Are you sure, he said quietly, that it isn't a guide dog? Positive, Pluto said. Looks like a guide dog to me. Does it? Oh, I see. Yes, it's a guide dog, all right. Fine, said the guard. Now go away, please. Pluto shook his head sadly and walked over to the escalator. There was a sign saying that dogs should be carried on the escalator, but it had clearly been put there by someone who hadn't considered all the possibilities. Next, said Miss Fisicelli, you take the potato in your right hand. Like this? No, I mean yes. Then you pick up the simpulum in your left hand, dip it in the sacred barley meal.
What sacred barley meal?
Drat! Said Miss Fisicelli. Oh, well, never mind. I usually just use muesli anyway. It's not quite right, sure, but the worst that happens is the prophecy turns out 10 minutes fast. Now, place the simpulum on the ptera and count to 10. Mary closed her eyes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
There was a sudden roar, and a coal blue flame sprang out of the sacred tripod, much to the surprise of Miss Fisicelli, who was leaning on it. There was no harm done, however, since the flame didn't seem to know that fire is supposed to burn. It simply played up and down her sleeve a couple of times, and then subsided to something like gas mark 4. However, did you manage that? Said the Pythoness.
I don't know, Mary confessed. It just sort of happened. Why, isn't it supposed to?
Well, yes, Miss Fisicelli confessed. Only it never has when I've tried it. I usually end up having to use maths and a lighter. Mary smiled, slightly embarrassed, and murmured something about beginner's luck. Then, as directed, she placed the patera over the flame, sprinkled more of the sacred muesli, and poured a libation from the small silver-gilt cornucopia. The flame started to rise again, only this time it lifted the patera up with it. "Zippy!" said Miss Fisicelli, impressed. "You've done this before, haven't you?"
"No," Mary said, looking away. "What now?"
"Well, strictly speaking," said the Pythoness, "we should now sacrifice a kid, a lamb, and a white dove. However, I have the neighbours to think of, so I generally skip all that. Sometimes, though, I do pop in a casserole. Less blood and saves you having to cook an evening meal."
Mary shrugged. "Sounds reasonable to me," she said.
"Usually, though," said Miss Fisicelli, "I don't bother. I've never noticed it make a blind bit of difference. You know how sometimes you can't be bothered sacrificing just for one."
"Fine," Mary said. "So what do we do now?"
"We wait," said Miss Fisicelli. "Sooner or later, the god will manifest himself, and then we can— Oh, hell!" The flame flickered, rose up, crackled, and went bright green. The patera bobbed on the crest of the flame and started to sink slowly down onto the tripod. There was a foul smell of sulphur.
"What's up?" Mary asked. "Have we got something wrong?"
"No," said Miss Fisicelli. "That's just a busy signal."
"Oh," Mary raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean we have to start all over again?"
Miss Fisicelli shook her head. "Not any more," she said. "You used to in the old days, but now there's a sort of redial facility. Just watch." She leaned forward and pressed an embossed lion's head on one of the legs of the tripod. The flame became blue again, and the patera started to climb back. "Look," Miss Fisicelli said, and pointed to the heart of the flame.
"Where?" Mary said. "I can't see any—" The words died on her lips. In the very centre of the flame, a man's face was slowly becoming visible. First, just the eyes, then the lips, nose, and chin. Then the fire seemed to mould itself into the shape of a head, the flames curling up from a fiery neck and flickering wildly to form the thick, curly hair. Mary gasped. The lips parted and the fire spoke.
"Hello," it said. "This is Apollo speaking. I'm sorry there's no one here now to take your call, but if you'd care to leave a message, I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Please speak clearly after you hear the tone. Thank you." Miss Fisicelli scowled. There was a sudden blare of trumpets that seemed to shake all the brains up inside Mary's head. "This is Betty Lou Fisicelli calling," the Pythoness said. "Oh, damn it, I hate talking into these things. Look, would you please very kindly sort of descend or send down a messenger or a dream or something, when it's convenient, of course, because we've had, well, it's rather hard to explain. Oh, some very funny things have been happening, and perhaps you should know about them. So please do call back. Thank you. Message ends. Ha," she added. The fiery head nodded 3 times and slowly became nothing more than a random panel of flames. The patera sank back. The fire went out. "Well," said the Pythoness, "that was a complete waste of time, wasn't it?"
"It was the most amazing thing," Mary whispered, as much to herself as the Pythoness. "He was so And if he does call back, Miss Fitzgerald went on, you can bet your shirt it'll be while I'm in the bath washing my hair or something. I really hate that, you know, having this great big burning face pop up at you while you've got your head over the wash basin. Still, there it is. She started to clear away the sacred implements. Betty Lou, said Mary, after a while. Yes, dear? What exactly is happening? Mary asked. I mean, I know it must be important because of what the entrails say, but I'm not so sure, Miss Fitzgerald replied. Maybe the entrails were wrong. I've never been entirely happy about divining with frozen chickens anyway, but I'm in enough trouble with the Residents' Association as it is without killing chickens all over the place. Probably all a storm in a teacup. Yes, but I think something funny happens to them when you defrost them in the microwave. Sorry, dear, what were you saying? I was thinking, said Mary, maybe we could work it out for ourselves. What's happening, I mean? I don't think so, said the Pythoness stiffly. Best leave that to the experts, don't you think? Yes, Mary replied carefully. Sure thing, but don't you think it's meant as an omen? Absolutely, said Betty Lou. That's why he's got to be told. But surely the whole point of an omen is that it's a sort of coded message, said her apprentice, which means that whoever sent it expected us to be able to understand it. So I thought, fine, said the Pythoness with unwanted irony. So you just tell me what it means when a red plastic nose suddenly materializes on the sacred image of Apollo. Well, or how a whoopee cushion managed to find its way onto the throne of prophecy. I thought maybe, or, said the Pythoness, why the three heads of the Acorn Tricer reunion are all suddenly wearing brightly coloured paper hats. I mean, she said, any fool can answer that. No point in bothering the god, is there? I'm sorry, said Mary humbly. I was only trying to help. Pythoness clicked her tongue in a not altogether unfriendly manner. I know, dear, she said, and it shows initiative and all the rest of it, but it's not our place to go guessing at things, and besides, you'll have to know sooner or later. It might be important. I suppose you're right, Mary said, but the message— That, said the Pythoness, proves my point surely. I mean, it could be highly significant, or it could just be kids climbing in through the ventilation shaft again. Really, we have to leave that sort of thing to the chief. Now, give me a hand washing up these last few bits and pieces, and then I think we've earned ourselves a drinky, don't you? Mary nodded, and Miss Fitzgerald tried to dismiss the whole business from her mind, but as she dried the patera and put it back in the holy chest, she couldn't help thinking that somewhere there was a simple explanation for it all, particularly when you consider the message which had appeared cut into the rock of the lintel from the treasury of the Athenians that morning. After all, it spoke for itself. Wiseacres of the world unite, it said. You have nothing to lose but your chains. About 30,000 years ago, when telepathy was the only readily accessible form of mass entertainment, there was a popular game show on the main brainwave channel called Read My Mind. A panel of guest celebrities had to guess what each of the contestants did for a living, and if they failed, they were torn apart by wild dogs. It was a good middle-brow family entertainment. On the show in question, a panel consisting of 2 river gods, a wood nymph, and a queen of the night were asked to guess the identity of a more than usually enigmatic character who turned up wearing a loud check suit and a red nose and answered all their questions by bursting into fits of laughter. The panel had got as far as the fact that the mystery guess was something to do with entertainment, but they were stuck. Time was running out. The mind camera was playing lovingly on the slavering jaws of the dogs. "He's a tax inspector," guessed one of the river gods wildly. The compere grinned, shook his head, and made woof-woof noises. The queen of the night started to have hysterics. He's a, said the wood nymph desperately. Oh, God, he's on the tip of my tongue. What's his name? Whatchamacallit? Thing. The mystery guest looked up sharply and scowled. Someone told you, he said. Then time ran out, and there was an advertisement for soap powder, and so the telepaths at home never discovered the whole truth, namely that the mystery guest, whose name was Gelos, was in fact the personification of laughter, the sworn enemy of the race of gods, in his previous incarnation, one of the original three. Another point which didn't get out was the fact that Gelos is the only force in the cosmos who stands between the gods and total universal domination, because only laughter and a sense of the absurd makes it possible for human beings to dismiss the gods as a figment of the imagination. Whereas, if Gelos ever finds a hero brave and strong enough to protect him from the gods, he will be able to rule the whole of creation. Pluto stopped, took a plastic bag from his pocket and opened it, revealing a sock.
"Here, boy," he said nervously. "Find." He placed the sock in front of each of the dog's three noses in turn. The dog growled ominously, and two of his heads started snuffling the ground. The third ate the sock, and shortly afterwards was sick. "Come on, good dog," Pluto muttered, and the ex-hellhound suddenly lurched forward, heads down, and dragged his master into the corridors that led into the Piccadilly line platforms. It is often held that two heads are better than one, and so Cerberus should have represented the optimum in scent-following efficiency. However, after 5 minutes of enthusiastic baying, tracking, tail-wagging, and snapping at the ankles of women with small children, he stopped opposite a fire bucket, pointed like a gun dog, and sat resolutely down. Having emptied the bucket and found no trace of the missing hero, Pluto began to lose patience. "Look, you bloody animal," he said. "Far be it from me to get heavy with a dumb beast, but unless you pack in the clever stuff and get back to work, you'll be up the vet so fast your paws won't touch. Got it?" That, Pluto later admitted, had been a mistake. Cerberus gave him a foul-looking triplicate, snarled very convincingly, and bit through the lead. Pluto toyed briefly with the idea of blowing gently up the dog's nostrils, as recommended by the lady at the obedience classes, thought better of it, and ran for his everlasting life. Cerberus, however, did not follow. Having satisfied itself that its master was out of sight, it grinned wildly and trotted off down the corridor in the opposite direction. A wall against which it paused briefly to cock its leg collapsed shortly afterwards into a pile of fizzing lime. Cautiously, Jason Derry lifted his left foot, moved it approximately a metre forwards, and tried to put it down. He immediately regretted it. There was nothing there. His foot simply continued moving, finding nothing on which to rest. The thoroughly disconcerting thing was that his balance was not upset, and as soon as he stopped applying pressure with his leg muscles, his foot stopped. He wasn't standing on anything, he discovered. He was just standing, floating, whatever. The important thing at times like these, he told himself, is to stay calm. This environment may be decidedly hooky, but as yet it has exhibited no overtly hostile symptoms. You could probably get to like it in time. Let's be terribly laid back and cool about this, and just take it as it comes. Who needs gravity anyway? "Help!" Jason said. He listened as the word he'd just spoken flopped aimlessly about in the darkness, slowly growing fainter and fainter, and finally dissolving into a clatter of disjointed consonants. He breathed in deeply. There was no air, but fortunately he didn't know that, and tried moving his right leg. "Woof," said a voice behind him. He froze, and after a few moments his heart began to beat again. He turned his head and stared, but there was no light. "Woof, woof." 3 different voices. Either I'm going potty or there are dogs down here. Given the choice, I'm going potty. "Hello," he ventured. "Anybody there?" Woof, woof, woof. 3 dogs. Jason muttered something under his breath and speculated about whether the person responsible for all this had got his priorities right. Exactly. Dogs are all very fine and splendid in their way. Absolutely nothing against dogs, either as pets or as part of an integrated sheep control system. But what we really need most of all right now is a floor. "Here, boy," he ventured. "Who's a good boy, then?" he added. "Woof," said 3 voices, and there was just a hint of ennui in them, as if they knew from experience that when somebody addressed them as good boy, it would soon be time to start retrieving sticks from freezing cold ponds. Jason plucked up his courage and extended a hand into the darkness behind him. "Yo," he murmured. Almost at once he was aware of something large and hairy brushing up against his leg, and a violent rasping sensation on the back of his hand, consistent with it being licked by 3 very sharp tongues at the same time.
It wasn't pleasant, but compared to a number of alternatives that suggested themselves to Jason at that moment, it did very nicely, thank you very much. Now then, doggies, Jason quavered, you and I are going to be friends, aren't we? 3 voices said woof in such a way as to suggest that a temporary alliance might well prove expedient at the present moment, but any more of this mushy, anthropomorphic crap and the deal was off. Okay, Jason replied, suits me. Have you got the faintest idea in hell we are? A trio of voices said woof in such a way as to indicate that if Jason knew, he wouldn't like it particularly much, but if he insisted on a clue, there was a pretty nifty one in his own last remark. Jason grinned nervously. I don't suppose you know how to get out of here, do you? Woof? Thought not. Woof? Sorry. Jason wiped his hand carefully on his trousers. Then, for the first time in his life, he listened hard in the back of his head for the sound of the 3 dots. Nothing. Marvellous, said a canine voice beside him. Said another. Remarked a third. Oh, come on, said Jason despairingly. Let's all stop pissing about here, or I'm going to have to give the whole thing up on the grounds of complete incomprehensibility. There was a long silence, and then the dog spoke, all 3 voices, but speaking as one. We, it or they said, are the dog. Well, yes, Jason replied cautiously. I had gathered. We, the voices went on, would like you to consider what you get if you spell our name backwards. What now? Yes, now. All right, said Jason after a short pause. You get good. So bloody what? If you spell moon backwards, you get noom. But right now, I'm more interested in getting back to Piccadilly Circus, if it's all the same to you. Think, said the dog. Oh, no, Jason replied. I tried that, and look where it got me. Look, thanks ever so much for dropping by, but perhaps we'd all get on much better if we went our separate... We, said the dog, are merely speakers. Barkers. Speakers, said the dog coldly, for the thought in your head. You call for us, we are here. Jason opened his mouth and then closed it again, waiting for some words to drip through from the filter paper of his brain. Some time later he said, You what? We are saying out loud what the thought in your head would be saying if it could speak out loud, said the dog. Really? Yes. You mean to say, Jason said, that I'm actually thinking all this garbage? No, said the dog. Jason whimpered ever so slightly. Oh, be fair, please, he said. I can cope with gibberish just as long as it's consistent. I thought you just told me. The thought is not you, said the dog. The thought is the God turns backwards. Previously, I had spoken to you in the quiet of your mind. Here, I am speaking to you through the dog. Why? Why not? There was another very long silence. Had you going there for a minute, didn't we? said the dog. Stuff it, Jason said to himself. Enough is enough. He made a careful estimate of the position of the dog's rear end and kicked hard. There was a triune yelp and a sharp stabbing pain in the back of his head, but he really didn't mind about that. He felt so much better now. Hello, said the dog. Serves you right, Jason replied. You had it coming. Can't you take a joke or something? Growled the dog. No. The dog growled ominously, and was that very faint breath of moving air that Jason could feel on his cheek. Would you care to rephrase that? Ventured one of the dog's heads. Why should I? Because, said a different head, in the circumstances, that wasn't the cleverest thing you've ever said. That's all. So what? Said Jason, snarled. You can have too much of being clever if you ask me. Right now, I fancy being mindlessly violent. Keep your voice down, for dog's sake, whispered all 3 voices, but not simultaneously. This is not the right time for aggressive posturing. Jason shook his head. I don't care, he said. I've had enough. I want to go home. Failing that, I want an explanation. My final, fallback option is a heavily mangled dog, but perhaps we can sort something out if we work at it. You want an explanation, said the dog. Yes. Then you shall have it. Jason suddenly became extremely still, as if something had just unplugged him. Did you say something? He asked. No, whispered 3 very nervous dogheads. Somebody said something. I know. Who? Oof. Oof. Then Jason felt something in the back of his head. Not felt as in an emotional response, more like felt as in there being a large, heavy weight behind his ears, which was swinging in a semicircle, taking the head with it. "Come here," commanded the darkness. But a tiny spark of courage flashed across the contacts of what remained of Jason's personality, and he stayed where he was. Fear of death, the unknown, darkness, and the devil were one thing, he decided. Bad manners were something else. "Only if you put lights on," he replied. The darkness laughed. "Sure." And there was light.